Welcome to Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, the weekly podcast that features the very best in career development in the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Patton McDowell, and in addition to podcasting, I'm a leadership coach, a mastermind facilitator, a best-selling author, and a speaker. I love taking these nonprofit leadership topics on the road or into your Zoom room. If you need someone for your next conference or perhaps a workshop, check out my new speaking page at pattonmcdowell.com for more information. Well, I've got another wonderful conversation to share with you through this episode, and it is with Matt Nash, who serves as the executive director of the Blackbaud Giving Fund and who has extensive experience working with what is an increasingly important set of supporters to your nonprofit. Now, these supporters are, of course, donors who give through donor-advised funds. And Matt's career journey has allowed him to really understand that critical philanthropic sector and will help you understand how you can benefit from their philanthropic spirit. Now, the conversation only got better because Matt then revealed 5 critical trends that he believes will impact fundraising in 2023 and beyond. So that certainly tells you there are at least 5 reasons to check out the show notes for this episode. It's number 201. Just go to the podcast page at pattonmcdowell.com for all of the resources and trends that Matt and I discuss, as well as more information on the great work he's doing through the Blackbaud Giving Fund. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Matt Nash. Matt, thank you for joining me on the path.
Well, Patton, it's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, this is a conversation I'm definitely looking forward to because, as our title implies, you are on the cutting edge of some of the key fundraising trends that our audience needs to understand. And of course, you bring fantastic experience in the fundraising sector. And I thought I'd start with a topic I hear, at least from a lot of my fundraising and nonprofit colleagues, the advent or the increase of donor-advised funds. And Matt, if anybody, there's nobody that knows more about this area than you do. So what does a nonprofit leader need to understand about this somewhat unique philosophy and psychology behind those donors who are giving to these kind of funds?
Yeah, sure, Patton. I get this question quite a bit, actually. In fact, it was something I started talking about back in 2014 because there were so many people that didn't understand what donor advised funds were. A lot of it really comes down to some simple things. And the most important piece, I think, is to make sure that everybody knows that a donor advised fund donor, they've got the money set aside. It is there in an account, and it can only go one direction. It can only go to serving a charitable purpose. So it's important that they already have funds that they're setting aside to give. And that means that they're intentional with their giving. I used to actually use the word strategic, but I think it's more important to know that they're intentional. They think about it, they know where they want to move their money, and they're putting money aside for that specific purpose. And we know that because the research that we've done with donor advised fund donors say that 2/3 of their giving actually goes through their donor advised fund. 1/3 they use with credit cards, checkbooks, that kind of thing. But what we find is that the donor advised fund money is used for intentional purposes, causes that they really want to support and they care about, and the rest of it is more what I'll call reactionary giving. You know, it's the friend that's doing a run, or it's they go to an auction and they're using funds to support causes that pop up, but the main focus of their giving is this intentional giving through the donor advised fund.
Well, and I guess you know better than any that some of the criticism, I suppose, is the donor advised funds are growing rapidly, and that the generalization, I guess, is that they're kind of tucking away the funds for the tax advantage, but they're not really charitable in their intent, or not giving away as much as they might. But I would think, Matt, there really is more charitable intent perhaps than we realize. Or how would you characterize that part of this conversation?
I think it's mostly that people are making 2 different decisions. I call it the heart and the head. The head decision is, it's getting close to December 31st. I have to figure out where I'm going to put our charitable funds. And a lot of that can be a tax kind of conversation, particularly if somebody's got a little bit more wealth and they're working with a financial advisor. But the second one is the heart decision. And that one is all about the cause. And so when you look at these people and their behavior, there's nothing there that says that they're just stacking money away. And in fact, when you think about it, why would you do that? You get the best, what, a 30% reduction in your taxes from this charitable donation. It doesn't make any sense to give away $100 to only have $30 back.
Right.
There's no, that doesn't make any kind of financial sense at all. So what we see is that it's more that they are able to move their funds in places and where there are needs. And it's been proven with data that shows that in various crises and things, large amounts of donor advised fund money can move in that direction. And also, they often are doing the donor advised fund to sustain their giving into retirement, so that they can give as much in their later years in life as they can while they're currently working.
Well, which indeed is a benefit to the nonprofit leaders that are listening, right? That if we deal with some of the fundamentals that you're going to help coach us around and maintain these relationships, there is a long-term giving possibility through these funds and through these individuals and families that do it. So thank you for clarifying that, because I knew you have heard these kind of commentaries about donor advised funds, I guess the pros and the cons. But before we unpack it further, let's talk about your experience. In fact, you serve now as the executive director of the Blackbaud Giving Fund. So Matt, tell our listeners, what exactly is the Blackbaud Giving Fund?
Sure. Well, the Blackbaud Giving Fund is a donor advised fund sponsor, just like any of the other donor advised funds that people may be aware of. But mostly what we do is we support workplace giving. So Blackbaud has a part of their business that sells a software into corporate America. And what it is, it's tied to their corporate and social responsibility initiatives that would happen inside a corporation. It's a giving and a volunteering capability. And what we do in the Blackbaud Giving Fund is we keep track of the donations that the employees make, either through credit card or a payroll deduction. Often that is then tied together with a company match. Each company has they'll match donations up to a certain amount per year, which I think is awesome because it helps with the amplification of the giving that the donor can create.
Right.
And then those funds come together with, as in a donor advised fund, a recommendation about where that would want to go in terms of the end charity. And we bring those funds together and we send them out to charities all over the world. Last year in 2021, we funded $630 million to 140,000 charities in 120 countries.
That's amazing and impressive. And it leads me to, I guess, a follow-up question of Matt, folks listening that might be interested in the kind of work you do. How does this translate, generally speaking, to your day-to-day activities? I mean, I guess there are things, and we'll talk about your journey to here, but before we do that, are you interacting, I guess, with a lot of these workplace settings, or what kind of work do you literally do?
Yeah, what does a day in the life look like?
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, I would say it's probably split in a couple components. One component of it is that often these corporations are unfamiliar with how the donor advised fund would work to support their activities, particularly in the areas where the corporate foundation is involved, because that tends to be a little bit more of a higher dollar money engaged in philanthropy, and obviously much closer tied to the corporate coffers.
Right.
And so I'll help them understand, what is a donor advised fund? How does it work? Why is it the more simple way to distribute money to these large number of charities that are out there? Because essentially that's really where it comes to, is it simplifies the giving both for the corporation and for the individual. So that's one part of it. The second part is that we're always looking to build out new capabilities and new functions. And so I work a lot with the product teams on different ideas about how we can get more money into the charitable sector, and how we can either partner with organizations such as corporations on this, or even doing things through the more public retail kind of giving capabilities that are out there.
Yeah, thank you.
That's generally the two key places where I spend most of my time.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I guess it leads naturally to the question of, all right, talk about some of the experiences you've had that led you to the work you're doing now, and maybe strengthens the work you're doing now based on that, that journey that led to this.
Yeah, the winding road that creates most careers. Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about those twists and turns.
You may be surprised that I have an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering. So that seems like a very long ways away from where
Wow.
and that moved into some years in consulting, which translated then into 25 years in financial services. The tail end of that was being involved with Fidelity Charitable at Fidelity Investments. Fidelity Charitable, you may know, is the largest donor-advised fund in the country. And in that job, what I did is I took care of anything that had to do with the donors, starting from the marketing teams that did all the communication out with the donors. We had a team that worked with some very high net worth donors and helping them think through their philanthropy in general. And then groups that service the donors and actually process the contributions coming in and the grants going out to all the charities. And what I would say as I was thinking about this is that, a common theme in anything I've ever done in my career is a focus on either the customer or the end user.
Yep.
And as I got involved with donor advised funds, what I realized was that most of the donor advised fund activities and the investment advisors and things that help these clients donate the money are all focused on the donor, helping them free up funds to give to charity, helping them think through how to go about being an effective giver of funds. But very few looked at both the donor and the nonprofit. And early on, I took our marketing team and we started studying both the activities of the donor and then helping the nonprofits understand what's in the head of these donors and how they operate and how they work. And so at Blackbaud, we call that an ecosystem of good, right? We bring in funds from donors, we share it with the nonprofits, we create a cycle of good that works in the world and hopefully makes lives better.
Well, I love the way you put that in that ecosystem that you've developed personally and professionally, it sounds like. Were there certain kind of milestones along the way? I mean, in terms of your career path, you have had some twists and turns, but I would think the collective value of those twists and turns makes you the kind of leader you are now. Or how would you describe that kind of journey as a whole?
Well, I think it's a lot of doing, trying, learning, and adjusting as things go. But along that way, I'll share with you a few sort of words of wisdom that I've received that have helped me. And one of them actually goes all the way back to when I was 16 years old.
Wow.
This might be a little bit of a silly one, but it's actually stuck with me since then. So it must be important, right? Sure. So I worked in a grocery store. And every 2 weeks, we'd have to go pick up our paycheck from the payroll department. And there was a little sign there that said, learn from the mistakes of others because you'll never live long enough to make them all yourself.
Wow.
And I've always held that in the back of my head because you can learn a lot from others as you go through your career. And I think I've done that because of that little phrase that was right there every 2 weeks when I was a young guy. Starting out in my first job.
Yeah,
but if I look further along, a few things have come through in my mind. Is that, in the world of a career, very little is black and white. It's much more, almost all gray. And as you get higher in an organization, the decisions you're making have much more impact and could have much more, unintended consequences. And so I've always lived by a simple thing of do the right thing. And at Fidelity, we actually translated that into, if you have a really tough decision to make, think for a minute, what will happen as a result of this decision? Will it end up on the front of the Wall Street Journal?
Yep.
And if it does, you don't want to make that decision. Right? Because you want to make sure you're doing the right thing. And second is it's, in my opinion, it's important for everybody to know where are we going. Because if you can get everybody in the boat, growing in the same direction, they may not all row the same speed. They might have little twists and turns about how they roll, but at least you're moving in the right direction and you're doing it together. And the third one is respect for others. The way I've always looked at work is that everybody has a different role to play, but nobody's more important than the other person. So the CEO, although they have big decisions to make, their job is simply a different decision than the frontline employee who's trying to solve a problem for a customer. And the more that everybody in the organization can have respect for each other, they will all work harder for each other and all work harder to achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve and make things right for the customers.
Yeah, love that. And love that these words of wisdom are clearly ones you've maintained. In other words, this is not stuff you looked up last week for the sake of any conversation, but you literally carry these.
I always try to keep it simple.
Yeah, well, one more question. I'm fascinated by, career planning in general, regardless of sector. Obviously, this podcast focus on the nonprofit leader, but Matt, have you been one that kind of sets annual goals, 3-year goals, 5-year goals, 10-year goals as you've thought about this career journey? Or have you been, you just excelled at each stop along the way and opportunities have just come to you?
I think it's a little of both, right? You put in place some thoughts about first what you don't like and what you aren't good at, because you learn those faster than the things that you're good at. And as that goes on, what I realized is that there were certain areas that were important to me and certain things that jazzed me, got me excited about what was coming. And then I always worked to keep my eyes open for opportunities. And sometimes those opportunities were obvious, and sometimes those opportunities were, okay, if something's happening over there, if I get involved with it, I might get lucky and something will strike. I may have to negotiate something to get into this area, but I was always trying to take on new opportunities and grow with those opportunities.
Well put, and not surprising. And again, I appreciate you sharing that, because again, there are folks listening that are pondering their career journey right now and trying to make sense of a lot of things coming at them. And speaking of a lot of things coming at them, especially in the nonprofit sector, of course, is something now we're going to turn to, which is fundraising and some of the key trends. And we may not get to all 9 of these, Matt, but can you start with the context of this? Is this something that you've been kind of pondering for a long time now, or do you each year think about some of the key trends? Talk about the context of these 9 trends that you have kind of articulated.
Sure. I think it really does come from what I said earlier, of getting some experience, working things, trying things, and then learning from each point that comes along the way. And when you do occasionally step back, actually it's opportunities like this that make all of us be able to think about, okay, if I have to, what is really important to me? It's best to do that when you're trying to think about how to tell others about it, right?
Right.
And I think that this list has evolved for me over the last 3 or 4 years, particularly as we've gone through the big changes with pre-COVID, COVID, and now coming out of the post-COVID world, and the kinds of changes that have gone on both in the nonprofit sector, in the causes, in the communities, but also in the places that can invest in this area, like some of these corporations I'm working with, to see, well, how are people solving for these problems? How are foundations coming into play to solve for these problems? How are corporations doing it? How is the individual giver coming in? And all these things have kind of come together, to me, over the last couple of years to say, I think these are key things for any of us to focus on.
Well, they're fantastic. And again, I'm going to tease our audience with that enthusiasm as we go on the list. And by the way, if Matt and I are not able to get into full detail on all 9, the show notes, of course, will link to a more detailed description of all the things, Matt, you have put together. And what I'll do here is maybe I'll feed you the headline and then ask you to explain what you mean and, of course, how this trend might affect nonprofit leaders. And delighted to see number 1 on your list was strategy matters. So talk about why you put that first and what does it mean for our listeners.
Yeah, well, to me, it's strategy that matters both for the donor and for the nonprofit. When I was working with these donors who were trying to figure out how to start their donor advised fund, and what I learned was they were very good at making money over their career, but they hadn't spent much time thinking about giving it. And one thing I like to say is it's easy to give away money. It's difficult to do it intelligently.
Interesting.
And the key there is for the donors to think through what's important to them. What are the causes that they feel passionate about? What kinds of change would they like to be able to see or make in the world? And that could be as simple as an individual student in an elementary school to trying to impact some of the major structural problems that are in the world today. And there are donors out there that are trying to do everything along that entire scope. And like I mentioned earlier, donors that do use donor advised funds are these people who are intentional about giving, which means they're starting to think about being effective and having a strategy. And so the more that they can be skilled at that, the better philanthropists that they will be.
I'm struck.
And then
sorry.
I'm sorry.
No,
Go
please
ahead,
continue. I've got maybe a related question, but please go.
Okay, all right. On the nonprofit side, it's been a very interesting place to be over the last 4 or 5 years. And a big thing is strategy, right? Where are we going? How is this supposed to be looking in our mind in terms of the people running these organizations and serving the needs that are happening out there? But it's almost important to have a strategy for the purposes of knowing when to pivot these days than knowing how to get to that end. And the reason why I say that is that there's been so much change happening to all of us that you have to be able to know when you're diverting for it. And the best reason sometimes to have a plan is to know when you have to divert and pivot, because you're going off the path. And it's easier than to say, okay, why are we going off the path? What's happening there? What's going on in the environment? What's going on with the needs we're trying to meet? And how do we change to meet those needs? And so to me, strategy is a very living word. You continually adapt, change, reinvent, rethink as you go. So that's why I say strategy is so important, both for the donor and for the nonprofit.
Yeah, well put on many levels. And what I was almost couldn't wait to ask you about was on the strategy side for the donor. It strikes me as a former recovering fundraiser myself that we are very focused sometimes in telling our side of the strategy from the nonprofit side. And perhaps inherent in your advice, Matt, is that taking more time to understand the donor's strategy. And that clearly, if they're thinking donor advised funds, they are being more intentional about that. And instead of trying to hammer them with our fundraising pitch, we ought to be listening to what drives their philanthropy. But is that a fair add-on to what you're suggesting?
Absolutely. Because you have to inspire them, but you have to know what inspires them.
Yes.
And once you discover what inspires them, it's much easier to position how they can help you make the impact in the world that you're trying to make.
Yeah, excellent. Well put. All right, let me move to number 2 on your magic list of 9 key trends. Number 2, you label digital is strong. Tell us about that.
Well, if you look at the numbers, 2021, there was $58 billion that were given by individuals over digital platforms. If you add to that the donor advised funds, which are all digital, that's another 35 billion. So it's a total of 93 billion, which is 19% of individual giving, and it's growing at a very fast rate. So digital means it's there, it's real, it's continuing, and it will become more and more the way that we all operate. Now
we have to play in that space. Again, the historic fundraiser, we want to be in person and we want to personalize it, and I know you're not saying we dismiss that, but we have to play in the digital space, I guess, right?
Yeah. We're all there. All the donors are there. All the nonprofits are there. So you have to be there. And it does work. right? So it grows for a reason. It grows because it's a successful strategy. And I'm talking about beyond the donate button on the website here. There's tons of platforms now that offer this digital way of giving. And the issue is that there's almost too many, right? And it can be overwhelming, particularly for a nonprofit.
Right.
And every one of those platforms wants something from a nonprofit to help them, quote unquote, register for their platform so that they can get the funds to them. And it can literally be a many hour job for these people that work in the nonprofits, to the point where they will begin shutting some of these down. So the key is, in my mind, it's okay, let's focus. Where are we getting our funds? Because everybody's got great technology that fundraising technology keeps track of what's coming in, where it's coming from. A lot of times it's easy to see the platforms that these donors are using. And my view is, don't try to meet the needs of all of them. Pick the ones that are the most successful for you. You'll find that there's trends that when you look into the database, and that'll be key as a key starting point. Then the key is who's behind that donation. It's not the platform. It's a person. It's a Patton McDowell. It's a Matt Nash, right?
Yes.
That's what you have to really get to. And it's good to look into your databases to find out who's behind, who's that donor behind that platform. And there are ways to do it. Donor advised funds, for instance, are one of the many groups that can overwhelm a nonprofit. But 90% of donor advised fund donors give their name and their address. Often, though, the systems of the nonprofits won't capture that information in the primary way. It'll be in a secondary place in the database, and so they end up, thanking the donor advised fund for giving them the funds, when in fact behind that is the Matt Nash or the Patton McDowell that actually gave you the funds.
Well, yeah, let me ask you about that, because that's often the risk, isn't it? That we don't officially, in terms of a tax receipt, acknowledge the donor advised fund if, in fact, it has already been acknowledged for tax purposes. But your point is that we risk diminishing the relationship value, right? If we don't still thank the person behind the fund. But
Correct.
In some cases, though, Matt, we don't know who it is, right? It's possible we could get a gift from a donor advised fund that is not, I guess, clearly identified to the individual or family behind it?
That is true, yes. In almost all of these platforms that are out there, the donor has the choice to pick anonymous.
Right.
Well, my point is that they rarely do.
Yeah. Would you say 90% often 90%, are open?
Right.
And we need to make sure we acknowledge those folks when they give us the information. We don't bury it in our database.
That's correct. Right. That's correct. And so the key is understanding where the funds are coming from, and then trying to be visible to that audience. So if you're finding that you're getting a lot of donations coming through Facebook giving, maybe you should be thinking about doing some digital advertising on Facebook.
Gotcha.
To help those donors recognize that, hey, we're doing this. This is our mission. We're on it. Thank you for those of you who give. You might be an organization that gets a lot of funding from community foundations.
Yep.
Well, the community foundations are usually very active in their communities. You can start to get to know who those donors are and begin appealing to them. You could be maybe a nonprofit that's all of a sudden in the middle of a very big cause movement. Look what happened with social justice over the last couple of years.
Right.
So if you're one of those organizations that happen to be in that mode, find out where those people are in the digital world and start becoming visible to them, because the more visible you are to them, the more that you're going to get engagement from them.
But your overall point, I take among several good ones here, is that we need to not overwhelm ourselves with the proliferation of digital platforms, but do almost like a self-assessment of our current donors, and then see which ones rise to the top, right? And then maybe put even more energy there.
Focus, find out who's behind it, and then find out how they're engaging with you.
Nice.
track where they're going on your website. Are they going in the places that you think are where you want them to go? Are they, first learning about what you're achieving with your cause focus? Then, are they going to the donate, or are they just going to the donate and then stopping? Learn more about it, their own patterns of discovery as they go through their journey too.
Yeah, excellent. And again, I'm struck by and yes, we know our nonprofit friends listening have tons on their plate, but what you're describing does not have to be a 6-week exercise, but a relatively efficient one that could, in fact, pay dividends because, as you said, it's already overwhelmingly digital in our philanthropic space. And if you're not playing in that space, you're going to fall behind.
Right, and start small, start where you think the biggest bang is, and learn from there and continue to learn as you go.
Yes, indeed. And moving to number 3 on your list, you're also suggesting we move fast. What does that mean to move fast in this context?
Yeah, well, what I really mean is DAF money moves fast.
Got it. It's moving fast, not us, it's them.
Well, I was at a conference in October. Yes, I was actually physically at a conference in October, first one I've been to in 3 years.
Nice.
And there was a gentleman named Isaiah Oliver. He's the president and CEO of the Community Foundation of Greater Flint. And he was telling a story of, obviously, of the water crisis that Flint has been going through for a number of years now. And one of the points he made, which I thought was really fascinating, is that the DAF money got there first. Before government grants, before foundations, before other communities rallied, money from donor advised funds was flowing into Flint at a very high rate. And what they did is they figured out a plan, knowing that they were going to get this foundation money to bring in the water and all the resources that they need. But the first thing they did was they built a distribution system. They bought, forklift trucks and things to be able to get the food and water and things off of the trucks and out into the community. And so the DAF money basically allowed them to go much faster because it came in quicker. They spent it on the right parts of the distribution channel that they knew they were going to have to build. And it was very effective. So I say that as an example because of the point I made when we first started talking this afternoon, which is the DAF money is there. It's in accounts waiting to be used. And when crises happen, when needs change for a nonprofit that a donor advised fund donor is supporting change, the money is there to move to meet those needs. And if they're intentional about giving to that cause already, literally conversations between you and them of, hey, this happened to us. We're now shifting here. We need you to help us support this area. And the money's there and it goes.
More often than not, it is available to be activated and in fact is not locked away. If we were to jump to the generalization I know I made earlier, Matt, your point is it can move even faster than any other form, especially if we have the relationships to back it up.
Not locked away. And then from a psychological perspective, the money isn't theirs anymore. They know it. And it's not, that decision to move that money does not impact their discretionary income.
Good point. All right, well, let's talk about the next one. In fact, I think we can combine. I know I don't want to oversimplify the depth of every one of these 9 trends that you've analyzed, but you talk about creating personal connections and the fact that employees matter. So it sounds like there's a relationship angle to both of those, but Matt, maybe expand if you would on that.
Be happy to. So we know that 75% of donors who donate to a charity donate where they volunteer. So then, it's a very well understood connection between volunteerism and giving, because it makes sense, right? If you get to know an organization that you didn't know before, you see the fantastic work people are doing, you see how dedicated they are, how smart they are, how ingenious they are. It makes you want to give to them.
Right.
And so the key there is connections, right? The more you're connected with people, the more that you're going to get people that want to support you. And I think that's just, fundraising 101. And what happens then is that, how do you get the connections? Well, one of the things that I'm seeing is that workplace giving is growing in a very fast way because people want to work for companies that are making an impact. And more companies are creating initiatives and campaigns and things to create impact in local communities. So it literally can be a training ground for new donors. A lot of these employees are new in their careers. They're out there, working on a habitat house and having a great time with their coworkers, and they're learning a lot about, what that, project is all about, and it will make them want to give. I use habitat just as one of many, many, many examples that you can use here.
Right.
So, when you have that, you have a big market of people that can become future donors. And then if I look at just the formal workplace giving that happens, where companies organize and spend money to create the kind of systems that the Blackbaud Giving Fund is connected to, the top 3 organizations that provide workplace giving vehicles to corporate America collectively have 20 million employees that have an option to use that tool to give or to volunteer. So that's a huge number of people. And a lot of them are new to giving and new to volunteering. So it's a marketplace of potential donors that nonprofits, I think, could really begin to take advantage of. And the corporations that work in those communities want it to happen because they want to make an impact in those communities too, because it helps their brand within the community and globally. So I think that's why it's like connections and employees can be a powerful combination.
Yeah, well put. And I'm struck by the opportunity. Now, acknowledging that not every nonprofit has built-in volunteer opportunities like Habitat or Special Olympics, the organization I work for, have wonderful opportunities to really engage in the mission as a volunteer. But I think many organizations do have opportunities, but they don't articulate those opportunities very well. So I'm thinking the note to the listener is, if I go to your website right now, is it clear how I might get involved as a volunteer and get more engaged? Because as you said, Matt, that engagement leads to investment. And so seems to me that is a no-brainer as to something we should consider.
I would add one more thing, whereas if a nonprofit begins to recognize that there's a group of employees that are either giving or volunteering, those employees are usually working with one company, and there's a reason why they're collectively working together. They're part of some sort of campaign. So if you can get to know what's behind that, you might be able to develop a closer relationship with that employer. And those employers are always looking for good places in their local community to have the impact that makes a difference.
Well, it strikes me then as a data management tip. Are we capturing as much as possible the employer of our donors and volunteers, right? So that we could, in fact, see that there might be a trend with a local company, and that might lead to even greater, collaboration and or support.
It's one of the reasons why the Blackbaud Giving Fund checks that go out to nonprofits say, on behalf of company XYZ and its employees, we're proud to present to you this dollars of a grant. And then they can they know that it's what employer it is, and then they have the ability to look at who those employees are behind it.
That's fantastic. Yep. Case in point for sure. All right. Well, Matt, let's look at one more at least in this wonderful list of trends and the related kind of advice inherent in each of these trends. Certainly pulled straight from the headlines is crypto. In fact, the way you label this is crypto is coming. So talk about that and how that affects the nonprofit leader who's listening right now.
Sure. Well, I'll maybe ask you a question, Ben. When you think of crypto, what's the first word that comes to your mind?
I got questions. I got concern. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
My confidence is not strong.
Right. So crypto is one of these things that's always in the news. It's coming. Some people might think, oh, and it's going at the same time, which simply means it's a volatile asset.
Yeah.
And if you step back from that and you think about any volatile asset, that means that sometimes it's going to be high and sometimes it's going to be low. Combine that with the fact that 20% of Americans own crypto. 33% of millennials own crypto. So there's a lot of people out there that have crypto. And when an asset is volatile, you're going to get people who actually can do it right or get lucky where they'll buy low and sell high, right?
Right.
So the big advantage of crypto is that you can have periods when the cost basis is very low and the value is very high, which is a perfect asset for anybody to give to charity. And the key is it just can seem very complicated. It can seem very scary. It can seem very risky. But there are organizations out there that are set up now for nonprofits where they will set up a program. They'll process the crypto. They'll sell it immediately upon receiving it from the donor, which really takes a lot of the risk out of the equation. And so I think that nonprofits can take advantage of crypto, and there's going to be times when it's dry, like right now, and there's going to be times when it's really hot, like it was a year ago.
Right.
And that will continue. We started at Fidelity Charitable with crypto in 2017. And the project actually began in 2015, and at that time, crypto was quite hot. By the time we rolled it out, it happened to be in one of the down cycles. But it bounces up and down, and when it goes up, it goes up in a big way and can represent large windfalls for these donors that want to take advantage of that by donating it. The key is, I would say to most nonprofits, don't hold on to it. It's not the kind of asset that you want to keep to be dependent on. You might want to keep some of it as a small portion of what you hold.
Right.
But
Right.
you can turn it into cash. It's a very good tool for charitable giving, even though it feels like all the things you said when I asked you what you think of crypto.
Yeah. Well, point well made. And so despite my concern or fear, even in terms of understanding an asset that I worry I had the ability to manage, you're just saying as nonprofit leaders, don't shut the door on it, right? And there are means to process, in essence, a non-cash gift, right? Maybe that's the other way to look at it, because we do, and we should consider non-cash gifts from real estate to shares of stock and all this other stuff. You're just saying this is another asset that could well become quite beneficial if we're not unwilling to consider it.
Look at it as the body of non-cash assets that are out there that could be turned into charitable funds and treated at that way, and hire an organization to help you process the transactions to keep the risk low.
Yeah, well done and well put, Matt. Thank you. Well, again, you have delivered, as promised, some of these key fundraising trends and frankly, practical advice a nonprofit leader can take from this. And there is more. Of course, we're going to put in the show notes, because I'm going to encourage our listeners to check it out and read more deeply about some of the content, Matt, you are putting out. Is there anything else, I guess, as we close, when you think about all these trends, and if indeed nonprofit leaders are coming to you saying, all right, Matt, what can I do? What advice would you have? Anything else that was not captured so far?
Well, I would say stay positive. Keep doing what you're doing. You inspire so many donors to give in a way that shows that philanthropic giving continues to grow. And I just say keep up the good work, and we're all working together to make this world a better place. Yeah,
that's well put. And again, I love the way while many are quick to look at the vehicle, the donor advised fund, your reminder about there are individuals and families behind these. And if we focus on the fundamentals of relationship building at all levels, we're still going to benefit from the generosity that's within these funds. So, Matt, thank you for all of this kind of feedback and ideas. And of course, if I can ask for one more parting gift, you knew this was coming, but tell me about a book that you might recommend to our listeners that's been meaningful to you.
I'm going to stick with my theme of being simple and straightforward, Patton.
Yes.
There's a book I read recently. It was actually recommended to me by my wife, who's a chief people officer of a corporation, and it's called The Good Boss. And The Good Boss is written by a woman named Kate Everly Walker, and it's really talks about the understanding within the workplace, women and other populations that might be underrepresented in the workplace,
Right.
and how it's important to be able to understand the messages that you're giving them. And there was two examples I think that were really interesting in this book that just gives you a sense of what this book is about. Is the recommendation was, if you have an end of the day meeting, make sure you end it on time, because you probably have people in that meeting who have child childcare situations, and they may have even made a special effort to reschedule things to be able to attend that end of the day meeting. And if you run late, you cause havoc with their personal lives. And it's something that can be not even thought about by the person who organized the meeting, but yet it causes great consternation among employees within the organization. Another one, which I was actually shocked by, was that, and this evidently must happen, if somebody's coming back from maternity leave, make sure that they get back into the job that they had. Don't give their job to somebody else. Don't give their big projects to somebody else. Allow them to come back and be doing what they were originally doing. Too many of them come back and they're lost and floating around an organization and feeling like the organization's not really supported them.
Great
examples.
I thought that
those are good examples. Of the book is very easy to read, and I kind of think it brings to light some simple things that we can all be aware of to make sure that we're working with our fellow employees to be as productive as possible.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Matt. And again, as a male with certainly workplace privileges, you're right. Sometimes we're not thinking about these things, and I'm delighted there's a book to lift it up. And I'm sure there are many listeners nodding their heads right now, like, yeah, that is the world I live in, with childcare issues and other things that perhaps their bosses have not been sensitive to. So thank you for adding that to our list of fantastic reading recommendations. All right, Matt. Well, great information. Thank you again for sharing. Where can people go to find out more about you and the great work you're doing?
Well, our website is the Blackbaud Giving Fund.org, all one word, the Blackbaud, BAUD, Giving Fund. Our LinkedIn handle is the Blackbaud Giving Fund, and you can find us also on Facebook and Instagram at Blackbaud Giving Fund.
It's fantastic. We'll put it in the show notes. I will encourage, again, our listeners to check it out, because they do indeed need to explore all 9 of these trends at their full detailed level. And for all this, Matt, thank you again for joining me on the path.
Patton, it was a pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Matt as much as I did and came away with some practical ideas that can guide you on your professional journey as you better understand the philanthropic sector that gives through donor-advised funds. And maybe this leads to some good conversation with your staff and board about some of these trends and how they might affect your nonprofit. Don't forget about the show notes. They are available on our website, pattonmcdowell.com, where you can find out more about Matt and the great work he is doing through the Blackbaud Giving Fund. Remember, this is episode number 201. As always, I hope you'll consider sharing this episode with someone else on the path. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe. Just go to the podcast page at pattonmcdowell.com and you will see the follow button. And if you click that, that will assure you will not miss out on any of our weekly episodes. They come out every Thursday. Of course, if you like this episode, click on the episodes button at the top of that same page, and you can scroll through thumbnails of some of our most popular episodes or search by topic or guest name. Thanks, as always, for the work you are doing in the nonprofit sector, especially right now, and keep up the good work for causes that are most meaningful to you. I will keep bringing you content that can help you do it even better. Have a great week. I'll see you next time on The Path.